We've actually after short break. The last one we had was budget. After which we've had we've been organizing many events, we've been participating in events in the last few months. We had a short break, but absolutely thrilled to be back. And today we are going to have a speaker, Sonal Shah, speak about gender responsive transport. Before we move to that, just quickly a little bit about the seminar series. The idea of the seminar series is to have free-flowing conversation where researchers and other professionals in the field of gender and development can speak one-on-one and just have an exchange ideas, questions, and sort of figure out probable research ideas in the future, which is also why we insist that we have it in an in-person format, but of course, COVID has opened up this idea of making it hybrid so that we can also extend it to a wider audience. Today, coming back to today's seminar, we are going to look at gender responsive urban transport, as I already mentioned. Our speaker, Sonal Shah, is the founder of the Urban Catalyst, and they work greatly on the subject of urban transport and also looking at urban transport through a gender lens. So with that, I think, Sonal, I would actually like you to speak a little bit about Urban Catalyst and then go ahead with today's presentation.
Okay, great. So thanks a lot, Shruti, for inviting me into action-packed days back to back. So I think, like you mentioned, we work, I think our mission is to work towards sustainable gender responsive cities and transport. We are a young organization. We are only 5 years old, but we worked across 10 states in India and supported in mainstreaming a gender perspective in public transport infrastructure projects, ranging from projects like the Delhi Meerut Regional Rail, the Bangalore Metro Rail, and the Chennai Metro Rail as well. Simultaneously, we also conduct action-oriented research along with government partners in order to implement gender-responsive interventions. So they can be at any level. It can be a policy, but it could also be very like you would call concrete and other solutions. So what I also have over here for you all on the table is some of the work that we've done. What does a gender responsive bus stop look like? And that is our goal in influencing or working at different scales, right? Like I said, from policy to infrastructure. So you'll also see one on gender responsive paratransit stops, right? So I think that's our goal. And the infographics kind of that we've shared here, sorry, I'm guessing that the online participants don't have access to it, but the infographics also summarize some of the key issues around walking, cycling, public transport, and paratransit that we've observed from a gender perspective, and what are those key interventions that can be implemented. So what I'm going to present today, as you see, is a study from 2021. And why am I presenting it? So back in 2020, right after the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a call for proposals from UK Aid on understanding the impact of COVID-19 on mobility. Now, when they were looking at mobility, we felt there was a big gap in understanding how women's movement, and by mobility, I mean, we focused within the city, so not necessarily migration at the point, but how was women workers' mobility and transport for travel for work affected? And what could have been some policy responses in order to make public transport responsive to their needs. At the time, we had partnered with the Dialogue and Development Commission in the Delhi government, who supported this research as well. So these are the findings from there. And I'll take you through some of the findings because this work and knowing iWage's interest in looking at women workers, our goal here was to look at existing women workers and predominantly women workers in the informal economy who constitute a majority of the workers in Delhi. So I think I'll start on that. Sorry? Oh, down, huh? Okay. So I think many of you may be aware of some of the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on women and what it led to, both in terms of fall in income, significant increase in household and care work, also increase in domestic violence. And I think what we had found in all the literature that we were looking at was a limited understanding of how the COVID-19 pandemic was affecting what we call resource poor women's travel for work, right? And how that was getting impacted. And so I think our aim was to provide evidence and to understand the impact of COVID-19 on their mobility and to inform policy guidance and responses by low and middle income countries. So while our research did a deep dive in Delhi, we did a rapid literature review for capital and large cities in South Asia. So I'll go through that very quickly. So you'll see we also learned a little bit from Dhaka, Lahore, Karachi, and Kathmandu. So I'll tell you how the research was structured. So one was a rapid literature review because this was a project over 8 months. So we did a rapid literature review on the impact of COVID-19 in the selected cities that I presented before. And we convened an online roundtable with civil society and women's organizations working in these cities in order to partly validate ground truth, question some of the things that we had also been reading, and to understand, were there any similarities in the way in which women workers in the informal economy were being affected. And that then led us to design primary surveys, which were conducted with 800 women workers across different settlements in Delhi, and I'll show you the map. These were telephone surveys because the surveys were done in December of 2020, and it was really difficult to conduct face-to-face surveys at the time. And then these, along with the roundtable, we also did key informant interviews. Now, who were part of the key informant interviews? These were transport experts, from government, from multilateral development banks, from policy think tanks, in order to understand how were different groups of policy influencers, as you may call, what did they know, what did they think, and how could that feed our primary survey as well. Once the surveys were analyzed, we also went back. We went back to interviewing, we went back to our key informants and says, well, this is what we found, and these are our preliminary recommendations. What do you think? So I think our goal was to kind of close the loop with our key informants, but also with our online roundtable participants. So I think we wanted to kind of not only take knowledge, but also close the loop to feed knowledge back. And we had a virtual workshop with the Dialogue and Development Commission, with Self-Employed Women's Association, who also helped us in interviews with women e-rickshaw drivers. And I'll also come to that. I think I presented some of that yesterday. So like I mentioned, I think this is a very rapid literature review. Like I said, we had phase one focused on the case study cities in South Asia. So again, this is, not comprehensive. We also have the report online, which goes into detail. You can have a look at that. And what happened during the pre-COVID scenario, and what were we seeing once when during the COVID-19 pandemic, when different cities and countries went into lockdowns, and how they were emerging from these lockdowns as well. Now, a key piece that we saw, particularly in some of the other cities in South Asia, particularly in Dhaka, because they were operated by private operators, were fare hikes, both in private buses and in paratransit, expressing a clear affordability issue for women in the informal economy. Oh, sorry, am I going back? Yeah. And some of the key themes that emerged, right, from the roundtable, like I said, was affordability of transport. The one very interesting thing that came up was that the loss of incomes during the COVID-19 pandemic actually resulted in dependency for women workers who earlier were bringing incomes to the home and also had a certain sense of independence. And also, I think that many groups highlighted the need for having a dialogue with decision makers and being involved in the decision-making process. Some of the key themes that emerged, particularly with our key informants, was understanding that if we were looking at public transport, and in this case, buses, it would help to understand what is the next preferred mode of transport for women workers, and how would you think about the so-called pink tax? I personally don't like that term, but were there any pink taxes? And also that, who had the luxury of teleworking? I think some of this, all of you may already be aware of. So I'm going to go very quickly. So what we did is, the first thing that we did is we looked at 2011 data, which had data on women's workforce participation at the ward level and mapped it with public transport routes. We had data on the spread of the routes, and we looked at access. And we were trying to understand, was there any relationship between public transport connectivity and women's workforce? And we did observe that there were some, and then you see that particularly towards some of the peripheries of Delhi. We have Najafgarh in the south, which also goes into the so-called rural areas. But you see that, I don't know, it's hard to say higher, but there was a higher workforce participation in areas that were better connected by public transport. So, I should have showed you. So, like I said, that what we had done is we had identified about 20 settlements across Delhi, and I'm sorry I don't have that map. And how did we do that is there was a lot of research done by VAGO and other organizations on resettlement colonies, on urban villages, on informal settlements, and we created these clusters and ensured a geographical spread. So we identified 20 settlements across Delhi, and we targeted surveys across those 20 settlements. So very quickly, what did we find? That who were these women? And we found that about 65% of them had not received a formal education. And, when we talk about intra-household inequality, one of the key pieces is that while 84% of the households did not own a vehicle. Now, when you don't own a vehicle, which means that you're going to be relying on public and shared paratransit, you become very vulnerable to disruption in their services. But even the households that had a vehicle, I think what would happen is that the male members of the household would get preference for the use of the vehicles before. And who were our respondents? A majority of them, about close to half of them, became domestic workers, but we also had street vendors, home-based workers, health and construction workers, those who said that they worked in grocery stores. And only 10% of them had access, and I think this might be wrong, because I think it says 10% had access to a personal shared or feature phone. I don't even think it's a shared smart or feature phone. It's not only smartphones. So the first thing that we did is, when we began to do a detailed survey with them, we actually found and estimated the loss in incomes due to the lockdown in Delhi, which we estimated at about 754 crores across Delhi. We had simultaneously also done an online survey. And we were mindful that the respondents in our online surveys were going to belong to a different socioeconomic group. And we began to compare different things. So we created travel diaries. So we asked our participants to tell us how they were traveling through the day, how many trips they had made in the previous day, for what purpose, and for what mode of transport. And what we found, and I think some of these kind of illustrates, is that we found that women in the informal economy versus our online survey respondents were traveling 20% shorter distances for work. They were more dependent on public transport. So about 81% of these women were using public transport for work. And when I say public transport, it's buses. IPT is shared paratransit. We understand shared paratransit? Yes, no, maybe? Good. Autos, e-rickshaws, Tata Magics. Yeah. So this is share. I mean, when we say shared, it means that you are likely to have a fixed fare and you share the vehicle with multiple passengers. So a lot of the trips to the metro stations by e-rickshaws are generally shared paratransit. First and last mile connectivity, which means how you travel to and from the bus stops. And we see again a difference in terms of the share of women who were walking for to and from. And you can see the difference in access to the vehicles as well as the digital payments made as well. One of the big pieces that we had observed is that while pre-COVID, about 90% of their trips were for work, after COVID, it was only work. So the idea that women may also be making household-related purchases, etc., didn't seem to be holding true. And we tested them for statistical significance as well. And I think one of the most interesting thing, and I think data has, I mean, there's enough research globally which is showing that women may be traveling during off-peak hours, etc. And it actually showed that to us, that women's peak, and these were women in the informal economy, were actually traveling between 11 to 12 p.m. So 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. in the morning and 2 to 3 in the afternoon. This could relate to the fact that we had a significant number of our survey respondents being domestic workers as well. And while 81% of all the trips were by bus, in the peak hour, they were actually traveling by shared autos, e-rickshaws, etc. And this could be for many reasons, right? It could be that the routes that they are going to are not catered to by buses. It could mean that because this was December 2020, it was still difficult because there were no reserved seats at the time. They were not allowing standing passengers. So women may have had to wait for longer times, and therefore they may have taken autos instead. So this actually became a really interesting finding for us. And again, when I say paratransit also became the next mode of transport, primarily because of less waiting time. And so I think the less waiting time became a big concern for them, even if they were paying, right? Because this is the time when we have the fare-free transport being implemented by the Delhi government. But in spite of this, I think they were quite time sensitive. A very interesting thing that emerged for us was how certain issues that were prominent for them before COVID-19, in some cases continued after. A big one was poor frequency of service and reserve seats not being enforced. So if you're a woman who's traveling for work, it's not a great experience. You know, it's I think very simply put, it's not a great experience for you to travel by bus. And another big piece, and I know that this is only emerging now, but we found this back in 2020, was that buses were not stopping to pick up women. And this had many reasons. And this has kind of emerged in, I mean, I think we're also doing a lot of work right now with frontline workers in buses. And this had become a big issue. Women kept complaining that if they were at a bus stop and if a driver saw them, then they would skip the stop and not pick them up. So this has been a consistent issue with them. A big issue with shared paratransit was primarily rash driving and overcrowding. And I think I'm going to relate this a little bit to what I meant by, had spoken about service gaps and how safety is related to service gaps. And overcrowding, while there are different forms of sexual harassment, one of the things that affects them very, very closely is overcrowding. Or waiting for a bus, and simply because they don't have access to a smartphone, you simply don't know when the bus is going to arrive. So you're waiting at the bus stop because there's no predictability or reliability of bus services. This was, so at the time, we had also done research on women e-rickshaw drivers. So the Delhi government had released its electric vehicle policy, and they were offering subsidies for the purchase of electric vehicles with a priority for commercial vehicles. And at the time, we also wanted to understand if there were gender differences in the way that the policy was enabling women and male e-rickshaw drivers in benefiting from the policy itself. Very simply, and then, so again, I think we had a very small sample. We partnered with the Self-Employed Women's Association because the women were actually supported through the entire journey of obtaining a license, of learning how to drive. Seva also provided them loans. It is a Seva Cooperative, I think it's called Seva Cooperative Society. And and I think they were also making their EMIs. I mean, they have high interest rates, and we'll go to that a little later. But we found we found differences that basically resulted in the following: that the women were actually operating on routes that were closer to their home. So their routes were about 50% shorter. So their routes were about 4 to 5 kilometers compared to 8+ kilometers for the male e-rickshaw drivers. The socioeconomic demographic was more or less the same. The working hours in a day, now that's questionable, like when working, non-working, because, well, the male e-rickshaw driver is working 10 hours. It's not a great, I mean, by no means is it decent working hours. But what happened is that women were working for money. So paid remunerative hours were 7, but then they were also going back in the afternoon in order to cater to household and care work, right? So what this did was it had an impact on the number of passengers in their vehicles, and therefore revenues per month. And so we estimated that they were generally losing close to 5,000 rupees a month due to what we called a safety and household and care tax. Very quickly, has anyone been on an e-rickshaw? Anyone? Rickshaws, e-rickshaws, e-rickshaws. Okay, great. Have you seen how the passengers are seated typically? So 4 behind, have you seen any in the front? Yes, yes, both sides, correct. And that's what I mean, right? So while the women e-rickshaw drivers were okay if they had passengers, but they had faced harassment, and they would simply like chuck the male passengers away. So what this means per trip, for a male e-rickshaw driver, you have 6 passengers. For a woman, you have 4. And when you talk to decision makers, they're saying, oh, but that's good because they're following the law. But it's not helping them remuneratively. So, right, so I think our policies really need to factor in. So our recommendations eventually proposed a model that looked at higher subsidies for women in order to purchase commercial assets, along with support from membership-based organizations. Some of our major big recommendations were really partnering with membership MBOs in order to bring forth perspectives faced by women workers in the informal economy to the government, and at one level improve digital literacy. But I will come to this. On the other hand, I think we also spoke about real-time information on feature phones, and it has been done. It's not rocket science. It has been done in many other countries. So not only relying on smartphones. And I think, and so we were actually proposing a mechanism of how women could report complaints and have a coordinated response for different modes of transport at the command and control center that is being established by the transport department. I can discuss this more. And one of the biggest pieces that we felt was really important is that there is a need for a multimodal mobility subsidy, because in spite of a fare-free bus transport, currently it's unable to cater to women informal workers' travel needs. And so I think we also estimated what that subsidy may look like that could be transferred to them. And again, how could you identify beneficiaries? We can actually, we can go into the details, because that can be done. And so I think I spoke about an SMS system for real-time information on buses. And I think recommendations to the EV policy as well. Thank you. We have a lot of other work, but I'm happy to just bring that when we talk. I think otherwise, yeah. Yeah, no. So yes, they did mention that. So they did say that passengers do feel that women e-rickshaw drivers don't know how to ride. They will not give. So they certainly mentioned that. But I think they also, wait, let me just show this to you. But you see female passengers per trip, but they also observed that more women were traveling in their vehicles. Yeah, yeah. Feel safe. Working with the workers in the first place. Any reason that they mentioned for not picking up or not working for very interesting, and I think a lot of this comes down to norms, etc. So this actually at this point, not in this study, but right now we are in the process, so we're still processing that information. But some of the things that come out in term when we talk. So now, who are the frontline workers? So we have the bus drivers, we have the conductors, and we have the bus marshals. Very likely to be men, even though there are few female conductors and a few bus marshals, but very likely to be men. And our initial conversations with them indicate the following, that if they stop at every stop, they will not be able to meet if they take 1 hour, it becomes 1 trip, they 2 hours. What is something how women are misusing misusing the scheme. They'll get on at one stop, get off on the second stop. So they'll board the bus only for one stop. Many of them will board the bus because they want the AC. I think just interesting. There's a lot of bias that is operating, and it's not like the conductors either feel responsible to report this, because I think this is I can't call it charity. This is something they all feel, because this is something we've heard from all three. So I think this really needs to be addressed. One of the big things now, and so you see this more with the cluster buses. Cluster buses are orange ones. Typically, they have to finish a certain number of kilometers per day. So it's a gross cost contract, which means that you typically have to complete about 180 to 200 kilometers a day. and you're paid on a per kilometer basis. While I think this ensuring that the bus stops at every stop unless women begin to complain. I mean, in fact, with some depots where we managed to get data, 17 out of 20 complaints that women are making are about buses not stopping. So women are not complaining enough, unfortunately. You know, if they did, I think that would make a big difference. But there is a lot of bias operating below this idea that I will not complete my schedules on time. So actually share.
How many laws in and around the policy like actually, how many laws are there in place that will define and change in the way this is functioning? I'm sure there will be a lot of them connected to the change in the policy.
Which policy?
If at all the change has to come out.
Wait, do you want one specific recommendation or others? Some of these don't require any change in law or policy.
There would be more laws in and around that will be affecting the work that you're going to be doing. So there would be a lot of things that would be around the external factors around it. Is what I meant.
Still having a hard time understanding what you mean, but let me see if I understand. There are SOPs, standard operating procedures, for the frontline workers, right? But there is no formal appraisal system, so it's not a policy per se. They have, I mean, each one of them has about 20. Okay, because so the driver has one, conductor has one, and so does the bus marshal, and the conductor has a performance appraisal system. We've had a look at it, and I think it needs some changes over there. So that would need to change along with a regular review. So I don't think there are fixed. I think there's no system as such that is being followed in order to ensure that that system works. Does that make sense? No, I feel like somewhere I'm not able to understand you. Okay, sure, happy to, because yeah. I mean, I think I quoted one yesterday, but again, it was not a law, but a regulation around women drivers, right? Women bus drivers and heavy commercial vehicles. Correct. Hi, yeah. There's now the height and also the eligibility criteria around having a heavy commercial license for 3 years before you could become a driver with DTC. And so they waived that, and they're also providing training. So along with the stipend. So I think so they've done two things: reduce the height requirements to 153 centimeters, and as well as once you get a heavy commercial license, I think they do have certain criteria around medical fitness and those, but then they will train you for 3 months, and then you will take a test in order to become a driver in DTC. So very modest numbers, but a definite progress forward. One bus driver increased to 35. I think about a few months. It's been a while. I think they want to increase it to 100 by April. So we'll see where they are. But the goal is to increase the number of drivers.
Like where bus drivers and all those other transport for demanding to put a lot of trucking which basically provides free transportation. buses. And also the reason telling that from about is that the reason won't stop at a bus stop is because they don't see women paying for the services. So then in the other that's transport department themselves. That's the actual they will get when you don't for the pay your services to a female. So how much the subsidy 20%, do you think this might be a very good option to actually um incentivize everyone to then do their own job and to also make it more streamlined?
Correct. So, the transport department is paying the cluster buses and ETC. So they're getting paid for the tickets that are being issued to women. So when you travel in a bus, there's a pink ticket, and then there are regular tickets. So women are being issued tickets, and that becomes the basis. So it's 10 rupees flat. Okay, so even if I'm traveling only 500 meters, I'm still paying. The government is still paying 10. So they're being paid. So there is that perception amongst, and this is also the perception that women are not paying for service, but the government is paying. So there is that. The subsidy would actually now what we had proposed that the subsidy would be transferred to women's bank accounts. So then, if they want to take a rickshaw, the rickshaw driver is still getting paid. But it's just that they're not incurring that cost because bus service is sticky, cannot cater to their travel needs. So I think because I think we still need a lot of research, and I think this is still Shona's, I think we still need to understand how the fare free transport schemes in multiple cities how is it impacting women's travel? Yeah.
Because if the morning itself, I was talking about the I think it's already wonderful. There are like having and I was thinking that is very people they actually do not so what the public transport system is so you know the on-time public property covers kilometers. Stop. One stop, you have kilometers. Obviously, that becomes a restricted thing, no? I so many kilometers.
Yeah.
But government operator and driver, conductor, and government employee.
No. Contract. No, so they're all contract employees. So in the electric buses, they're operated by drivers. So electric buses, so the drivers will be the Tata Motors, for example, if Tata Motors operating those buses. So there are two models. In the CNG buses, the drivers and conductors are still contract workers. So there's no government employee.
That's what is it in Kerala,
They are what? Sorry. Bangalore is also, so I feel like they're government employees. Say Mumbai government employees. These are not. So I'm given to believe, and this is something we're investigating a little bit more, is that over and above covering a certain number of kilometers, they do have certain service level benchmarks, one of which is stopping at all stops to pick up passengers. And I'm given to believe, again, I think these are some conversations, and I think right now we just need to, we'll begin validating all of this as well, but it's that if they receive a complaint that this bus is not stopping, especially with some of the electric buses, what they're doing is they're fining the company. So there's a fine per stop, but there's just not enough complaints. Complaints, no? So that's what I'm saying. The only way to monitor is through the call. So they have a number you call, it goes to the DTC HQ headquarters and comes to the respective depot. So that is the only way to monitor, unfortunately, because somehow the dynamic in the bus is not with that.
Monitor the stop, like the buses which they track for which there's an emergency service. That's what the central system monitors the buses that goes around the city.
Yeah. So, when we began the One Delhi app, has anyone used the One Delhi app? It's just yeah. We are finding a lot of challenges with the app because ideally, if you have GPS on the bus, you should be able to track which bus is stopping at the bus stop or it's just going. So, there are many gaps that we're also trying to figure out. I've used the One Delhi. I'm getting all wrong information. So I don't know. So I don't know how effectively this is working. But from my understanding right now, the conductor or the bus marshal calls the headquarters and then alerts them on the bus breakdown. Yeah, that is from what I've been given to understand. I don't think it's working as systematically as we are thinking, but I could be mistaken on this.
GPS on the app is very effective, like because you can also track where the buses are at a given moment, but that's always very odd. So like
always very odd. In a few other cities and they're on point. Like they actually count and say there's like 1 second on the bus is your side. No. Yeah, so far it doesn't, and I think that this information gap is like one of the biggest challenges because where bus routes are going. And when I'm saying people, it includes women, but it also includes men. Women more so, but it also includes men. There's, yeah. Yeah, so I'm also given to believe because when we Seva was planning to expand the program as well, so they did. They wanted to expand the program, so I'm given to believe that they might be increasing the number. So this was an initiative by Seva. So in order to yeah, 2019. Yeah. But they were continuing, even while we were talking to them, etc. They were continuing the program. Yeah. There were some challenges because in the subsidy, but I think it evolved and the women were getting the subsidies after. Yeah. So Transport for London has something known as quality of service contracts, which actually, where the payment, while is also based on kilometers traveled, it also has certain quality criteria. And, many things need to work in order for this to happen. It's not only the contract, but also that you should be able to monitor the buses, right? So if you have the GPS device, you have a control center where you can monitor the buses, then that can work too. And I think many things have to go right in this way in order for this to work. Janmarg in Ahmedabad, which is a bus rapid transit system, they also had private operators. And I mean, I think many things worked there because of the way that a bus rapid transit system is also designed. But it worked also, I mean, it's also worked in Ahmedabad. So as an example, where that, I mean, because they had median stations and you have level boarding, so there's a lot of ease of boarding and alighting, very difficult to skip bus stops as well, and just move ahead too. So correct. So they had, so they had median dedicated lanes. Yeah. So I think monitoring is such a big part of this. There have been some challenges with technology contracts as well. So I feel like there are a lot of challenges in the contracting systems, in the providers and the systems, etc. So. So it was primarily a transfer to women's accounts of a certain amount of money. Yeah, correct, DBTs. But the focus was starting with women in the informal economy, and then we had thought about how we could also identify going through a phased approach. But the point being that we recognize that women don't only use a single mode of transport, but they use multiple modes. And so therefore the subsidy was to give them that flexibility to use other modes of transport where they may incur cost. And often, which is more expensive than buses as well. Even if it was not priced, but shared paratransit in general tends to be more expensive. Like, I'll just give you an example. With a lot of women street vendors, for example, street vendors are not allowed to board buses often, unless you start early in the mornings because of the wares that they carry. So in many instances, and in Ranchi, we have observed that particularly women street vendors together would hire what we call tempos. These are three-wheeled autos, and then go to city markets so that this provides them a point-to-point. Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. So they start at 4 or 5 a.m. Yeah.
About urban local bodies and structures. So within India, in the Indian experience, BMTC versus the DTC versus the BEST in Mumbai, there are so many different ways in which these systems operate depending on who calls the shots. Like, is it the corporation or is it like a slightly between the state government and the city? So what's your experience been on how this affects these decision makings at the city level?
One of the things that we are seeing that is common to all the city and the state transport undertakings is they're not being sufficiently supported financially, because they have been making losses and they're not getting sufficient support from the respective transport departments. This is something that we are seeing consistently. And it doesn't seem that money is a problem, because that this money is also being invested in rail-based transport systems in all these cities. So there is this kind of gap that we are seeing, I think, across these cities. The big difference, and I think she brought this up, contract staff versus permanent staff has some impact because there's less ownership of ensuring that the service is good for your commuters. I think staff in general are a little more concerned about their own well-being as well. So I think there is that as a second kind of issue. I would, if I have to actually, from mine, this is personal, compare, let's say, I'll add Ahmedabad, which had the bus rapid transit system, Delhi, Bombay, and Bangalore. I actually really, as an able-bodied, upper middle class, upper caste woman, really appreciated Janmarg, Ahmedabad's system for many reasons. Level boarding and alighting, very easy connectivity, and it might sound a little also air conditioning. No, and I think we take this for granted. Our own initial conversations with women in e-buses in Delhi is that air conditioning matters because it's hot. It's hot. So I think it's these, and I think Delhi's decision to go with AC electric buses and to transition to an electric fleet can, I think, have a big impact, because Bombay, even Chennai is like Chennai and Bangalore to some extent, but they all have high floor buses. It's hard. It's hard to board and alight. So for an able-bodied woman, but I can imagine what it must be for children and for caregivers as well. So I think there are some of these differences that I see, and part of it might actually have to do with civil society activism, I think, because you have very high activism, which is why Delhi only has low floor buses. And civil society advocates in Chennai have been fighting very hard to get low floor buses, but unfortunately, they're not getting support. MTC is not getting support from the transport department in order to purchase or whatever these buses. So that support from the transport department is actually missing across all states. Delhi seems to be more committed. Huh?
Actually, this opportunity to buy is
yeah.
All the routes from buses of purchase from the
Yeah.
Otherwise, they would be those very difficult ones. But they actually did a whole lot of buses started by then. I remember it's now because then I was also struggling with my thesis on going to the university, taking bus and all of that. So I don't remember the genuine days.
So because it's been now, that was around 2005. I mean, started in 2005, 2014 is when it was winding up. All these buses are old. They need to be replaced, actually. So this is that time when they need to. Yeah. So they actually, so that they need to be phased out in order to get new buses. Yeah. In Pune, I saw another thing. They were converted into toilets, public toilets. And so some interesting examples. I don't know about the scale up. And so I'm happy to learn as well. So I saw one example of this bus converted into a public toilet, but I don't know what happened after. It was that. So.
Another thing of entry point there are several entry points to be generally listed. Something on the environmental economic deadlines as well. Jensen planning a while back, but it was a guideline which not technically enforceable.
Correct.
It's just guideline for
Correct.
So that's either that, we just rely on like having a guideline was the board policy. Like what is actually what?
Correct. Guidelines are not mandatory. So guidelines are guidelines, and if a city will appoint qualified experts now, or whatever, let's say urban planning and others, you need many, they may perhaps take the guidelines a little, we may see and apply the guidelines, right? So there is that is one, but city city statutory master plans, I mean, by virtue of the name, they are statutory binding for easily about 20 years. So that has a lot of teeth. It can have teeth also if civil society organizations, I feel, are advocating. So we use it as a lever and push. But I think you must have seen development control regulations. I don't know. So you have master plan, you have a development control regulations, because those are the most important. I want to build a building, I have to follow those development control regulations. But often you'll see interest groups amend these regulations. So you don't want to modify, you want to amend so that it's a small change. And I have enough examples of how this has been done with a case in question is Mumbai's Milllands, but that is for a separate conversation. Small amendment had a massive impact on the way that the Milllands were being redeveloped in Mumbai. So this is one way that a lot of interest groups will then, the master plans also don't have a very good track record. So because because many other plans are not linked to the master plan. Third, that I feel are schemes. No? We are seeing so many schemes at the state and the national level. Hriday, smart cities, etc., etc., etc. schemes. So there's still a lot of work is getting done on the ground through these schemes. You asked me about entry points. No? Correct. Sorry. I just want to see what before it works. Yeah. Schemes, missions that may work within the overall framework of the master plan, but then you can still do a lot of work on the ground. I had I want to say policy, but policy is not binding. And in some cases in transport, people have very nice policies. I mean, I'm sure, but okay. Yeah, we'll talk. I'm happy to talk more. And I was just going to come to regulations. So we have regulations and laws, state town planning laws, lots of impact, other regulations and laws. So motor vehicle rules has a lot of impact on many things and so on. So multiple. Yeah.
I don't see any handout or anything in the
For all your responses, did you ask them about their feasibility of getting metro? Because I mean, because of the finances of the district, is there a difference in your research?
It's a good question. I will have to go back, but my understanding is that they will not. I think it was very rare to occasional travelers at the Delhi Metro not for work. Okay. Yeah.
what specific reason, as in the
I-
cost or?
The affordable, so, I'm sorry, I can't detail like this now, but from what I've read so far, it is, cost and access. So depending on how close the metro rail station is to your, house. But we have seen a drop in the Delhi metro ridership after 2017, when, there were two fare hikes. The fares were hiked twice in the Delhi metro. So, what's that?
And just a part of my question, I'm just wondering, if we had a little bit of time, do you have any sort of observation on how it's being utilized for specifically increasing safety within transportation? Because my understanding, the bunch of there are things actually funds coming in different times. Not strictly towards transportation and towards maintaining transportation for them. Or do you have any evidence?
I have some, and I think CBG has done a very good research on this. So also while actually referring to that, some of the cities that I know and I'm aware of have done multiple things. A big part of the money was used towards by the police for CCTV cameras. Also, depending on the city, for example, in Bangalore, they also used it for CCTV cameras within their buses. And automatic vehicle location systems, very simply put, GPS device, so that buses could be tracked. Like this is our conversation, on what needs to happen irrespective, and what is put and what is included in the name of safety, right? But they also did some interesting things, and I'll give Chennai's example because they've done some interesting stuff. In Bangalore, they also used the money to train women drivers. So, I think that was another with the World Bank, what they and I still haven't seen that, but what they did is, of course, the World Bank and the China it actually used some of the Nirbhaya funds to create a general policy lab within Chennai City, Greater Chennai Corporation, and they also use the money to revise, okay, modify, and I don't have a right word, but to improve the grievance redressal mechanism. So again, lots of different interventions in different cities, but I'd also request you to see CBG's report for a more holistic picture. Yeah.
With that, we have a picture. I have plus another part. Showing light on this, a lot of conversations now. One last time is also found that mobility is a big issue, which is a big barrier. I'm working towards it is what enable more women to participate in the workforce. But showing light on the tangibles, like we knew this is the issue, but what are the specifics of the issue is something that this was an eye-opener for me. I'm sure all of you agree. So thank you so much, Sonal. Thanks for everyone who joined us online as well. I'm going to ask for a number to open this letter and stop there.
Is still recording? Fine, I can actually end it, and no, I can start it from here.